Episode 2, Whispers in Panaca. On July 20th, 2001, Kirstin Lobato, who goes by her middle name Blaise, is placed under arrest for the murder of Duran Bailey. 12 days after Duran Bailey was murdered, officers drive the 2.5 hours to the small town of Panaca, Nevada, where Blaise was living with her parents, and placed her under arrest. You might be asking, how? Why? Did Blaise know Diane Parker? No. How did she become suspect number 1 in this case? We'll answer all of those questions. But first, I want to tell you who Kirstin Blaise Lobato is. Blaise never had an easy go. When she was just 5 years old, she was raped by her mother's live-in boyfriend. She was assaulted 2 more times, once when she was 13 and again at 17. After her mother's boyfriend was arrested for molesting her, Blaise's dad came and got her and moved her to the small town of Panaca, Nevada, about 170 miles from Las Vegas. Blaise's mother's boyfriend did spend time for the assault on her. Blaise also reported her 2 other attacks to police, but nothing was done. Blaise turned to drugs to try and cope. By the time Blaise was a teenager, she was already using and addicted to crystal meth. In May of 2001, Blaise was exotic dancing, and after a shift, she headed to a weekly motel, the Budget Suites, to meet friends. Today, those weekly hotels are still rife with crime and drugs. In 2001, Las Vegas crime was even worse. As Blaise gets to the Budget Suites, she's getting out of her car when she says a man attacks her, pulls down her skirt, and tries to sexually assault her. Blaise is able to pull out a butterfly knife she has and stab her attacker in the groin, possibly slashing his exposed penis. Blaise hops in her car and drives to an ex-boyfriend's home who isn't there. She leaves a note and has her friends come pick her up. Blaise says the man who attacked her was African American, huge, and more than 200 pounds. Blaise did not report this attack to police. Her attorney, Phil Cohn, thinks he knows why.
Blaise was using a ridiculous amount of methamphetamine, and I'm sure she didn't want to go to law enforcement high.
Because Blaise didn't go to police and Blaise was admittedly high, we aren't exactly sure when this attack happened. However, while we don't have a definitive date, we can narrow it down thanks to her visiting her ex-boyfriend's home, leaving her car, and that note. We can also narrow down a time because a few weeks after the attack, Blaise left Las Vegas and went back to her hometown of Panaca, and she started telling people about it. Here's attorney Stephen Jackson.
We're talking about May, June, July of 2001. Blaise is from a very small town in Nevada called Panaca, Nevada. It's 700 people. It's in the middle of nowhere. Nearest stoplight is like 80 miles away. It is a very small, insular town, and people talk.
From what we can tell, Blaise's sexual assault happened during the weekend of Memorial Day 2001. Memorial Day was May 28th. So how did we get to Memorial Day? Remember how Blaise went to her boyfriend's house and left a note? He was out of town for Memorial Day weekend. Blaise says her attack happened after her shift at a strip club, so presumably late night, early hours of the morning. But day or a specific time, we'll never know. After the attack, Blaise continued using meth, but decided to move back with her family in Panaca, Nevada to get her addiction under control and just get her life back on track. Blaise actually believed someone was poisoning her meth in Las Vegas, and she was pretty sick. Her stepmom, Becky Lobato, took off work to care for Blaise and took her to the hospital in Panaca. On July 5th, the same day Diane Parker tells police about her rape, Blaise has blood work done at a hospital in Panaca. Her stepmom, Becky, stayed home with her the following day on July 6th to care for her. And while Blaise was out of Las Vegas, she wasn't done talking about what happened to her there. Here again is attorney Stephen Jackson.
One of the people who she talked to this about was really into acting and theater and that sort of thing. And in Cedar City, Utah, there's the Utah Shakespearean Festival. So opening day of the Utah Shakespearean Festival, Blaise and this other girl are driving to Cedar City, which is 80 miles away. And during this drive, they have this conversation about this attack that Blaise has suffered. Now, you can track when opening day was, and it was before Duran Bailey was killed. She then tells a whole bunch of other people about it before July 4th.
Duran Bailey was found dead on July 8th. in Las Vegas. So based on when Blaise began telling people about her own attack, it was at the very least a month before Duran Bailey was found. So how did Blaise get on police's radar? Upon her return to Panaca, beyond telling everyone she knew, including her family, about the attack, Blaise confided in her teacher and close friend, Dixie Tinkin.
Blaise then goes to her friend, who is also her ex-school teacher, kind of a mentor in Blaise's life. And she goes to this teacher and talks to her about this event. And Blaise says this incident happened at a rent-by-week hotel on the east side of Las Vegas in May of 2001. Fast forward a couple of days, this story sticks in this teacher's mind, and she starts to worry that Blaise might have been the victim of a crime. She calls a friend who is a probation officer in a town that's 12 miles to the north, and that probation officer contacts the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and says, essentially, do you have a case where a person's penis has been cut?
And of course, police did. Duran Bailey, the man found brutally attacked and beaten inside the trash enclosure at Nevada State Bank. And this is where the case turns into a game of telephone. After Blaise went to her former teacher, Dixie Tinkin, Dixie calls her friend, a probation officer named Laura Johnson. Laura Johnson then calls Metro Police. The same day police got that call from that probation officer, Laura Johnson, detectives were driving the 2.5 hours to Panaca to arrest Blaise. Attorney Stephen Jackson, who grew up in Panaca and knows Blaise growing up, and Dixie Tinkin, is bothered by the rumor mill which led police to Blaise.
I mean, I know Dixie, and Dixie is something else. This is what's really frustrating about the case, too, is like I can see Dixie making that call, but like blowing this out of proportion. She just blows everything out of proportion. She's very hard to understand. She's very hard to reason with. So like her being the primary witness is like an abomination, because she just like, I can just see what would come of that.
Hours after Detective Thowson receives that phone call from probation officer Laura Johnson, Detective Thowson and Detective James LaRochelle make the 2.5-hour drive to Blaise's hometown of Panaca. The detective stopped and spoke with Laura Johnson. However, police never spoke with Dixie Tinkin, the person with first-hand knowledge of what Blaise told her. They solely used Laura Johnson's third-person account. From Laura Johnson's home, they make their way to Blaise's home. Blaise is just 18 years old at this time and maybe weighs 100 pounds. She's a tiny thing. Both of Blaise's parents, her dad Lorenzo and her stepmom Becky, are at work. Blaise agrees to begin talking to detectives. What was first said? Well, we have some of the police audio, but not all of it. But we do know Detective Thowson, at the beginning of their recording with Blaise, brings up Blaise's rape when she was just 6 years old. Here is public defender Philip Cohn, who ends up representing Blaise for trial, talking about detectives.
They went through this story with her 3 times, and only the third one was taped. I know the kid pretty well, and I know how pliable she is. It would be very easy to move her around. And again, this is the problem why police should tape everything. If I would have been there with her, I would have said, what do you got? What do you have?
Blaise went through the details of her attack with police, which she tells them happened more than a month ago. Here is a portion of her conversation with those detectives.
I cut his penis. I remember that. I think I was trying to cut it off, but I don't know if I actually did.
Blaise's defense said when Blaise was talking to detectives, she was describing her attack that happened in May and thought that's why police were there. Police believe she was describing the murder of Duran Bailey. Here again is attorney Phil Cohn.
And I would have said to them, wait a second, ask her the number one question. Where did this happen? Where did this guy attack you? And you fight back. But they didn't do that. They specifically walked away from it. It was so very clear that they knew information that they kept from her. They didn't ask her, was it at a bank? Was there a construction across the street? Because that's when the Palms was being built. I mean, there's so many questions they could have asked to pinpoint where did this happen, but they didn't want to.
I interviewed Blaise years ago, and here's what she told me.
I thought, oh my gosh, I killed somebody. I didn't realize until much later that they were talking about something completely different.
Blaise tells detectives she only remembers bits and pieces of the night because of her meth use, but says after she defended herself, the man fell over and was crying. Here again is her talking to police.
He was crying.
And what did you do next?
I left.
Blaise's stepmom, Becky, came home while police were interviewing Blaise and watched from a side room. Her father, Lorenzo, came home as she was being escorted out of the house. Blaise had told her parents about her attack in Las Vegas, and as she, in handcuffs, is being taken from her home, she says to her stepmom, Becky, quote, "I did it, and now I have to do what I have to do." To her father, she says, quote, "I'm sorry, Daddy. I told you I did something awful." Those words and her taped interrogation with police, prosecutors say, is a confession to the murder of Duran Bailey. Now, for a minute, I want to backtrack and go through the facts of the case. Weeks before Duran Bailey is murdered, Blaise begins telling people about her sexual assault attempt where she says she cut a man's penis to defend herself. July 1st, Diane Parker says a man named Duran Bailey raped her. July 5th, Diane Parker goes to police about that rape and says he sodomized her. July 8th, Duran Bailey is found less than a block from Diane Parker's apartment complex, murdered with his penis cut and his rectum slashed. Blaise's attorney and family says after speaking to police, Blaise believed the man she had attacked in self-defense had died. Blaise's attorney, Philip Cohn, says never did detectives ask Blaise any clarifying statements about where or when her attack was. 2 days after Blaise's arrest, the local newspaper in Las Vegas runs a story about the murder, and the headline includes the date, July 8th. When Blaise's parents see the date of the murder, her mom told me her first thought was a mistake on the paper's part. Her dad called Detective Thousan and said, "You arrested the wrong person. Blaise was in Panaca during the time of this murder." Detective Thousan tells him he arrested the right person. But beyond Blaise's own words, what evidence did police have? The victim, Duran Bailey, had been brutally beaten, his teeth knocked out, he had a skull fracture. For Blaise to have committed this crime, she would have needed a weapon. During Blaise's initial interrogation, detectives asked her if she had any sort of weapon in her car, and she says she has a bat. Police also asked Blaise about the clothes she was wearing the night of her attack and the knife used. Blaise tells police she ditched the clothes and the knife. Both Duran Bailey and Blaise admittedly used drugs. Blaise used meth and Duran Bailey crack cocaine. Not the same drug, but that didn't seem like a big difference to police. What evidence did the police not have? Any way connecting Blaise to Diane Parker or Duran Bailey? No physical evidence was found in Blaise's car. Police also didn't have any evidence that she was in Las Vegas the day or night of the murder. In fact, dozens of witnesses placed her in Panaca, Nevada throughout the day and into the night. So where does this leave us? 2 African American men with cut penises. Is it possible these 2 attacks are one and the same? Police think so. Could they be? Next time on Presumption of Guilt.